Good afternoon. It's good to see you all here today. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to talking about Les Mis and the creation of Les Mis, and let me introduce our panel to you. On my far right is Mark Binns, who is from Arkansas and is our musical director. And Mark, you were also, this is the second or third show you've been a musical director for? Second. White Christmas, you were a musical director for White Christmas. And how many shows have you worked on at the Rep in the last few years?
Well, I was assistant on all the premieres this year, or last season.
Right.
And I've played in a lot of the shows.
This is probably at least your seventh or eighth show at the Rep, right?
At least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sitting beside him is Christopher Carl from New York City. Christopher plays Javert in our production of Les Mis. And this is Christopher's third production at the Rep. He was our Javert in 2008, 2009, and he played our captain in Treasure Island that we did last spring. And Rafael Castanera, who is in his 13th season at the Rep. Rafael is our production manager and also the costume designer for Les Mis, and has been the costume designer for a number of shows, including Treasure Island. Sitting to my immediate right is Doug Webster. Doug Webster is from Colorado, but Doug works everywhere. He has been associated, he plays Jean Valjean for us here. This is Doug's second time at the Rep, and he played Jean Valjean for us in 2008. And Doug has been associated with the production of Les Mis on Broadway and around the world for the last 25 years. Surely he will get it right this time. We are delighted to have this panel, and it's a panel mix of actors and the creative team, because I'm primarily interested today in talking, we sat around and talked about what do you talk about when you talk about Les Mis. And I thought the interesting thing to talk about would be the creation of this musical on the Rep stage. As most of you know, we did the play in 2008, 2009, and that year, 2008, was the first year that Les Mis was available for production in regional theater. And now, here we are in 2014, so it was 2013 that Les Mis once again became available for production in regional theater. Les Mis began its life in 1980 in France, and it had, as a concept, it was made into it was a concept album. It was brought to Cameron Mackintosh's attention. He's the producer in London. And he produced it in 1985 in collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company. The reviews were mixed, but that didn't matter, because the next day, the day after it opened, the sales took off, and they have never looked back. Since 1985, there have been 48,000 professional productions of Les Mis around the world. And tomorrow there will be 48,001. And that's a phenomenal number. Les Mis is the most successful musical in the history of the world. No other musical has been seen by as many people. No other musical has been produced as often. No other musical is as popular or has made as much money as Les Mis. It is a cultural phenomenon that's been translated into 22 languages. So it is a touchstone now in the world. You can go almost anywhere in the world, and there may be a handful of brands that are truly universal. And Les Mis is one of those universal brands. We talk a lot about why. Why is that? What is the case? You know, Victor Hugo's novel, has anybody ever read that thing? It is virtually impossible. I read the annotated version, which takes out the 300 pages of on the architecture of Paris, and I mean it is a meandering epic, and inside that meandering epic is an amazing story of loss, sacrifice, hope, and redemption. It is a quintessential story that touches hearts in cultures around the world. The story of this man who sacrifices, pays a huge unfair price, and then spends the rest of his life hiding and continuing to sacrifice, and the people that he encounters throughout. So it has this historic sweep, but it is, at its essence, a very religious tale about a man and his journey towards redemption. And so I think that in that core, it is it is a vastly compelling story. But the devil is in the details. It is an awesomely complex story to tell on the stage. It is, you know, it was when it first opened in New York. I saw it when it first opened in New York right after the London premiere. And it was amazing to watch the turntable and all of the things just sort of explode on the stage. It was a spectacle in 1985. We have those images seared in our mind artistically and culturally. We have the little girl with the broomstick seared in our mind. The original producers took that image from an 1850 or a 19th century engraving, a little girl sweeping a sidewalk. And that became the iconic image for Les Mis of the little waif sweeping the sidewalk. And so these, you know, this artistic footprint is daunting and intimidating when a regional theater like Arkansas Rep tackles a show like Les Mis, because our expectations are so high because everybody knows the score. Last night we had our second preview. It was sold out, and it was pay what you can night, and I sat in the back next to an usher, an older gentleman who he looked like a football coach, and the show just a little under 3 hours, and I sat back there beside him for 3 hours. He hummed the entire score under his breath, slightly off key. And I'm sure he wasn't the only one humming the entire score under his breath. I thought about saying something to him because I was trying to take notes on the production, and I kept thinking, well, everybody sounds off. And then I realized it was him. That was you, I know, yeah. But I ended up not saying anything to him because he was having his experience with Les Mis, and that was his experience. And he had a very good time. And so, you know, we all bring our expectations to the table. I'll show you, you know, when we begin the process, we knew in 2008, and I will bring these guys in eventually and at some point. That's right. But Raphael designed the costumes for the original production that we did in 2008, 2009. And as soon as we saw how successful, we were terrified when we did Les Mis. Cost the theater $300,000 to do it in 2008, 2009. That's, at the time, that was a little over 10% of our budget for the entire year to do for one show. And we had only had $65,000 in pre-sales before the show opened. We opened it, it was the leading show of the season in 2008. And we were terrified that it was going to be a flop, that it was oversaturated, everybody knew it, nobody wanted to see it. And then within 2 weeks, it became the highest grossing show we'd ever done. So we knew we wanted to do it again, and we didn't. So why are we doing it now? Because the window for rights became available, and that doesn't happen very often. It's like a Disney movie. You know, you only get to buy Dumbo every 3 or 4 years, or it is, I'm not comparing our show to Dumbo. But so, you know, it's opening on Broadway. It's a national tour, and it's celebrating its 25th anniversary. And so the rights just became available again. But to make sure, to keep us honest, the producers changed the score and reorchestrated it. And so the melodies are all the melodies you're familiar with, but the orchestrations, and we'll ask Mark to talk about that in a minute, the orchestrations are entirely different. And the transitions from scene to scene are entirely different in terms of how long they are. So they made sure that you couldn't just do whatever you did in 2008, 2009. They built that into the new process. Characters are all there, scenes are all there, it's all reorchestrated. So we had that hurdle to meet as well. We do this production in cooperation with our friends in Phoenix, Arizona, like we did in 2008, because this project is so expensive, it's great to have a producing partner. So we'll do it here in Little Rock, and we'll take it to Phoenix, Arizona, where it will run for a couple of months. Obviously a much larger market, the 5th largest city in the country. So they have, you know, their production will run a little longer than ours, but it helps us pay our bills here in Arkansas to create it here and move it to a much more expensive market in Phoenix, Arizona. So that helps offset the cost, and they were willing to produce the play again. So that was the second reason. The rights were available, our partners in Phoenix were interested, and then the movie came out last Christmas. And I loved the movie. I loved a lot about the movie, but there were some things I didn't like about the movie. And the one thing I thought was, I thought the actors, you have to have movie stars to sell $1 billion worth of tickets. And so those movie stars were very brave to put themselves out there and to be vulnerable, to sing those songs live, or live for the filming. And that was admirable and commendable for those guys. And Anne Hathaway won an Academy Award for it. That's very exciting. But to my mind, the play was written for the stage. Demands to live on a stage, that experience of the audience impacting the actor's choices. And star power is no substitute for vocal power. And I just would, Russell Crowe is fine. I enjoyed him in Gladiator. But Christopher Carl is a better Javert than Russell Crowe. And a nifty gladiator. And he's a good gladiator, too.
The musical.
That's right. That's why we wanted to do Les Mis. That's why the time was right for us to do it now. I thought earlier, somebody said, well, why are you doing Les Mis in this season? And I said, well, I'll give you the answer in 2 words. Clybourne Park. I don't know if any of you had the chance to see Clybourne Park. It was one of my favorite shows at the Rep. You can't produce a play like Clybourne Park, which will sell 2,000 tickets, if you don't produce a play like Les Mis, which will sell 14,000. You can't. That equation doesn't work. We're a regional theater whose our mission is to produce a diverse array of plays. So we care just about as much producing Clybourne Park as we do as producing Les Mis. We put just as much of our creative life into both those projects. But in this market, in this environment, we have got to make sure we are smart physical stewards of our organization. And so the artistic life, the physical life of the theater is just as dependent upon Les Mis as it is on Clybourne Park. And so that's why we're doing Les Mis. And I'll show you an example. Look, this is, I start out with the director's book for a show, every show. And this is Les Mis. That's Les Mis. And that's art. Or that's red. That's red that I did in the fall. So that's red, and this is Les Mis. And each play had the exact amount of rehearsal, same amount of rehearsal time, 22 days. So it's just a different animal when you're working on a play like Les Mis. And really my job is to sort of be an artistic CEO and to manage the process. Let me ask Raphael if he's still awake and still here. Talk about, you're also the production manager. What does a production manager do? We know what a costume designer does, but what at the Rep, what does a production manager do, and what is your role in the Les Mis process?
Okay, well, to understand where we need to go back 5 years ago when we did it, well, more like 6. For a show like this, I always tell Bob, our Christmas show and this spring show they're usually the largest, I call them our Macy's parade. When I lived in New York, I was working in a shop and we did some costumes for the Macy's parade. And the Tuesday after the Macy's parade, I was at their warehouse doing repairs on them. Pretty much you do the parade, you take a day off, and then you start planning the next one. That's how long it takes. And for us, this is our parade. So in a nutshell, what I do is make sure that everything happens and that the people are there to make it happen, and that they make it happen with the money that they have allocated to us. And also to make sure that we have people around that can make $1 look like 10 and 10 look like 100, because our budgets are not that great, are large, I mean, but no Broadway show have ever enough money. We can always use more. But With Les Mis, one of the first things is, because this is a massive, epic show, and how are we going to do it? And every actor at the Rep gets paid. And there's musicians, and it was going to be the largest orchestra we've ever had. It's how do we mount this show? And the first thing I did for Les Mis was they give you the script, and you read it, and you are clueless. Because it doesn't give you, the script that they sent you doesn't have any stage direction except that they sing. So we were lucky, the Pioneer Theater in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I happened to go to school at the University of Utah, was the first company that was awarded the rights for Les Mis back then. And our current stage manager now, that is stage managing Les Mis, was working back then at Pioneer Theater. And I said, Danny, do you have your breakdown? So she actually emailed me like an hour later, all their breakdowns of how many people they use and what parts were they using. But they were using like 36, 38 people. And Mike McCurdy was having heart attacks that we cannot have that many people. So then we sat down and we figured out how are we going to double and create tracks. And tracks is you start as a prisoner, you become a convict, you become a poor, then you become a pimp, then you become an onlooker at the car crash, and then you're a judge at the trial, and then you are a guest at the inn, and then you become a poor that becomes a gang member in 30 seconds, that becomes a student, a student, and then they stay students for a while, but then they're dead students, and then they become wedding guests, and then they're the same students again. So that's what we did, and that's how we started creating the show. And when we did it, Mike McCurdy, our managing director, had budgeted for 24, and I said, like, 24, this is great. And he goes, no, 24 including the kids. So, and then, but also I'm going like, we devised everything, also too, we had like, what we call company apprentices that are kind of like extras in the show too, that we were able to put in to augment, because you know, when you have One Day More, when you have the barricade, you don't want to have 3 people fighting the French. So he was organizing that. Also too, this show was about the music. I mean, I remember back then it was like we need to have the right orchestra. So back then we used the orchestration for the touring companies, which was full and complete, but it was not the Broadway with 22 pieces. It was with 13 or 14, but it was complete. We had never hired that many musicians, and then where do we put 14 musicians? So that's when we started putting them in our rehearsal hall, and through TVs and microphones, you hear them in the house, and actually, that's the best way to do it now for us. Hiring crew, hiring a wardrobe crew, and then how are we going to make this? As a costume designer, because I need the tracks in order to going in and create the costumes, and how are they going to change costumes and wigs? And you have 4 wigs, you have 2. There's like 50-something wigs in the show. Men and all the women are wigged from beginning to end. And some of the guys, as specialty characters, are wigged. It was how do we do this massive project and keep it? I mean, originally when we had our company plus our friends, I have friends in Nashville that run a costume shop there, and he was doing this. This was our first show of the season, so they came in and we developed ways of pattern, because at that time, not now, there's more now, because I had to make the show bigger this time around. There were 52 pair of pants in the show that were built, because you don't go out to the store and buy pants for $18.23, or shirts. We had to build all the shirts, all the vests, all the suit coats, all the skirts. One vest has 93 buttons in it. Everything was sewn by hand. They're actually finishing the last details of this one. Of this production today as we're speaking here. So it's to manage the whole process and make sure that it gets done. And our conversations are like, something you don't know, I mean, I don't know if you realize about the rep, is that we don't have depth on our stage. We can use another 10, 15, 20 feet. So when you see the back of the wall, that's it. So if you exit right and you enter left, you need to run down the stairs, go around a corridor, come back up. So usually when we see the first show, it's going like, if you make him go out right, he needs to come back right because he has to change a costume. There is no way, and you don't want them to break an ankle while they're doing it. When you go see the show, and you buy many tickets to see it, please, I hope you're not thinking about it, but there is over 200 to, I stopped counting at 200 costume changes that happen. It's massive. Specialty makeup. There is, just so you know, because there's, our company of actors is 31. There's 30 on stage, I believe. No, 29. There's kids that double up and understudy each other. But then there is like an orchestra of 14, which are 2 people that work on sound, 6 dressers, 5 people on the floor, 3 follow spot operators, 1 stage manager that controls every move everybody does on stage every time a light goes on or off. And there's more.
Well, let me ask Mark to talk about the creation of the music. This is you talked about the orchestra. You've got 14 pieces, 14 actors, 14 musicians, not 14 pieces. 14 musicians upstairs on the second stage. You can't see anybody. I mean, you have a television where you can see on the television, but you can't interact live with any of these actors. They can't communicate with you. How do you prepare for the music? And also, because, if you know Les Mis, it's what's called a sung-through musical. There's no dialogue. It's all one song after the next. So every single note is underscored, and it's our job to make sure you understand every word and to enjoy the music. So what do you do?
Well, the first thing I do is I pray that the mics don't go out, because we do have a vocal feed where all of the orchestra members are on a headset, and we hear the actors that are wearing mics. We hear them coming through our ears. So, but the challenge to create something like Les Mis musically is, well, let me back up a little bit. When I'm literally grew up with the show. I first heard it when I was 10 or 11, I think, and I think it was the 10th anniversary, because I think Les Mis premiered the year I was born. But, yeah, because it's in its 28th year, I think, and that's how old I am. But anyways, but recently, the first production I heard was the 10th anniversary. I think they called it the Dreamcast, and it was a huge orchestra on stage. And so, in my mind, I've always had this huge, just symphonic sound that Les Mis has. And then they came out with a complete symphonic recording, and I was so familiar with that. So every piece of orchestration that I've ever heard from this production had at least 60, 70 players, and that's just the way it's always been in my head. So when I saw MTI that sends out all the materials, the scripts, the scores, everything, I saw a list of 14 musicians, and I went, holy cow, how am I going to make this sound as big as what I've always imagined it to be in my head? And the answer to that is it's not going to be as big, but it's amazing what 2 keyboards can do. I have 4 live string players, 4 brass players, 3 reed players, 2 keyboards, and a percussionist. Yeah, bass is one of the strings. Yeah. So the purpose of the keyboards is just to try to give it an extra dimension, an extra symphonic layer. For instance, sometimes the keyboards will be playing an extra string layer to kind of support the live strings to give it slightly more of a symphonic sound. So yeah, it's amazing the technology we have, what we can do with those keyboards. And
don't you spend a lot of your time programming?
Yeah, I wish I had logged how many hours I spent on this show. And that's another one of the challenges. Les Mis is a show, as Bob said, it's completely sung through. The orchestra never stops. I think we stopped for maybe 15 seconds in Act 2, where Eponine has, or no, it's at the end of Act 1, Eponine has this like 15-second a cappella moment. And that's the only time we stop the whole show. And so I'm like just chugging down water during those 15 seconds, you know. But yes, the 14 pieces that we have, what was the, I'm sorry.
No matter programming.
Programming, that's where we were. My mind trailed. They usually keep me behind a piano and in a pit for a good reason. Yeah, the programming, I know I spent at least 10 hours maybe, 15 hours just programming the keyboards, somewhere in there. Because Les Mis is a show that's designed for a conductor. And so since I'm trying to be one of the conductors or the conductor and one of the keyboard players. So that's the challenge there. And so that's one of the reasons we have headsets, so I can constantly keep a communication with the orchestra members. And because I'm playing most of the show and I don't always have a free moment to have my hand up. I mean, I'm doing as much as I can, but there's moments where I'm literally just speaking into my Britney Spears mic going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's the only way to keep us all together. But I mean, we have our challenges, but we meet them, and I'm very pleased with the way it sounds.
And also, just so you know, I mean, the actors see him.
Yes.
If you go into theater and you're in the orchestra and you're toward the front, look toward the first balcony, and there's two TVs, and you will see him in front of the keyboard. And the actors at times just look to make sure that they get, because he's conducting them at the same time. And it's actually pretty impressive. And the drum setup alone, I mean, that guy doesn't stand for 3. I mean, it's gigantic. It's as big as this platform.
If you're in the rep and you come see the show, go use the bathroom on the second mezz. It's usually less crowded, and the other benefit is you can look into the second stage rehearsal hall and see the musician setup, which is very cool. So I would encourage you, just as an insider tip, to go stick your head to go upstairs, use the less crowded bathroom, and the added benefit is to see all the musicians.
Yeah, take a tour of the percussion setup, because the original orchestrations, I think, had 2 percussionists. They've condensed it into 1 percussionist, and so he's got live timpanis. I think he has 12 toms spread out above the timpanis, and huge bass drums, 4 different snare drums, I think, and xylophone belts. It's just an amazing setup.
The last part of the equation that goes into the creation of a musical like Les Mis are the actors. Now that's the part you know and you remember, but from a creative point of view, that's the last piece. That's part of the iceberg you see are the actors. But that's the last piece that come. You know, we auditioned in Phoenix, Little Rock, in New York, but I knew that, you know, there are 3 actors from the original production, 3 actors in our production: Kelsey, Christopher, and Doug. Kelsey Atkinson lives in New York, but is from Arkansas. She's back in the production. And Christopher, Christopher was doing Treasure Island when we announced Les Mis, and so we had the opportunity to speak one-on-one about a mutual interest in doing the show again. I sent a Facebook message to Doug to see if he was interested. Now that's it's a non-traditional casting approach. I don't usually Facebook random actors and see if they want to be in a play at the rep. But I knew that if we could get Christopher and Doug nailed down, then our casting challenges would be easier. But Doug, you've been associated with this musical for a long time in a variety of capacities. Talk to us a little bit about your experience in this, and then here you are doing Les Mis again. How do you keep it fresh, and what's new about this approach to the role?
Well, first off, I remember the moment this little face of Bob Hupp came up on my little Facebook screen saying, "Hey, Doug, we're thinking of doing Les Mis next year. Are you interested?" And I looked at it. Of course, I responded, "Sure." And then I called my wife. I was in my office in my home, and I said, "Hey, get this. This has never happened before." It was, you know, it reflects the personal relationship you develop when you're working professionally with someone. I teach a lot of kids to do what I do. And I've got kids who are working on Broadway in London and around the world, and they're happy little campers. And some of them are your waiters and waitresses in various restaurants, too. But there's a saying, you're hired for a theater project for the first time because you're the best in the room, and you're right for the job. You're hired the second time because you're one of the best colleagues, and they want to work with you again. And that's the sincerest compliment that I can pay another person or receive as a professional. And totally off the record, I want to say thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
And it's the reason Chris and I are here. We don't have to do this show again. As actors, we discovered everything that needed to be answered in the role of Javert and Valjean. I mean, I've had 25 years of thinking about this character and how to portray him. And as I grow older, I have a slightly elevated perspective on the role. And I'm understanding things that I hadn't understood before or hadn't even considered. When I was 25 years old and fresh out of school on the national tour, putting on a white wig, going, oh, I'm an old guy. You know, talking to my 80-year-old father, and I said, what do I do? And he said, well, your feet hurt, and you don't have any spring in your step. Use that. And so I put that into my characterization. Then for the last couple of years, I was working as an activity director in Portland, Oregon, with a senior community. It was a high-end place. I mean, this is a quite high-end place. And I was basically the entertainment director, and it was fun it was my day job while I wasn't off singing. And I hung out with a bunch of 80-year-olds. And we compared notes and realized everyone in the room was about 50, but they were driving old cars, which happened to be their bodies. And it gave me a perspective on Valjean as far as his inner strength as opposed to his physical strength. And so there are these layers that an actor can deal with. But as far as the original company, we used to call it the actor-proof musical. I joined the tour in 1989, and it was a year after it opened on Broadway. It was a year and a half after I first was introduced to the idea of the show by a colleague who saw it in London, and when I went to visit him, had a Post-it note on the album and said, Doug, I'll see you a little bit later. Listen to this in the meantime. This show is for you. And I listened to it like a kid, you know, with an LP, a double LP, looking at the pictures, realizing I wanted to do Valjean. The idea of the show and the way the character was written fit me like a suit off a rack. You know, when you have that magical experience in a clothing store where you see something that looks good, you put it on, and all of a sudden it's like, I'll wear it out, thank you. That was Valjean. I'd spent 8 years studying opera. My teacher, Nicola Rossi Lameni, was a colleague of Maria Callas at La Scala. That was the training I received. I turned down my first opportunity to sing Les Mis because I was working with a fellow by the name of, who was I working with? I don't know. I was studying in France because I was working with somebody who had worked with Poulenc. And I wanted to work with the old school. And so I am the most overtrained theater singer in the planet. But that said, what Bob was talking about, what failed in the film was the voice. Russell Crowe is a singer. He's a rock and roll singer. He's got a band. He sounds good when he does that. But when he sang off of the breath, and you know, he was saying, there, out in the darkness, and he's kind of mumbling kind of like that's his acting style. Not to say it's a bad acting style, but for Javert it was a bad choice, because Les Mis was designed to be an opera. I met Alain Boublil and Schönberg when they came to the Broadway company, and they were pop song writers in the 70s, but they grew up as children of opera, and their idea was to write an opera. The arias would not be a standard da capo style, they would be a 16-bar pop song style. But the recitative and the infrastructure and the chord structure of Les Mis in the recitative part, the talking bits, is just standard opera. It's lifted completely from the 19th century style. But then you get to the song, it becomes a popular form that we all know. The nature of opera, and the reason opera is still so popular and wildly popular among people who don't speak Italian or understand, is the timbre of the voice, the sense of the voice and the vibration and the science of it, that it reaches you, it vibrates your body, you feel it. And then the words trickle down, and so you've already got the emotional content, then the words layer on top. If I tell you a story, you have to intellectualize it, understand it, develop an empathy if you have the ability to do so, and then you get the character. By Russell Crowe making a choice of speaking the words, you don't have the natural, immediate empathy that anyone can understand. And that's how you miss your opportunity with an audience. And that's what Bob was referring to, that this is a sung show. And this is why it's exciting for myself and for Chris to be able to sing this show. And I know Chris was dealing with the orchestration, that it didn't support the way he sings. And through the magic of Mark changing the orchestration to support his actor, the next day, Chris walked off the stage like a rock star because he had the music to support what he was interpreting.
Let me ask Christopher to follow up on that. I don't even know that I know that.
The new orchestration that we talked about earlier that came with this 25th anniversary, they changed some of the feel of the songs. Even though the lyrics are the same, the tunes are the same, the orchestration was a little different. And one of the things that I noticed, the first time I sang Stars with the orchestra, there was an audience. It was, and my mind went to, this sounds like the build-up to a 50s rock ballad. Bum, 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 bum. I felt like I should do a little Elvis twist and turn. All I had to do was go to Mark and say, could we like smooth all of that out, make it more majestic, make it less a rock feel and more of an anthem, just sort of like big strings, and boom, the next day I performed it and it was right there. I felt like I was riding a wave instead of winding up to do a rock ballad. So it's all in the way that it's orchestrated now, and you know, tweaking it to make it our own. And yeah, it was.
How do you, Christopher? How do you keep things fresh? You've recently done. This is the third production of Javert you've done.
Right.
And you and Doug enjoy a good rapport on stage and off. And does that personal relationship influence choices, or how do you keep this Javert fresh for yourself?
I find working with Doug, it's almost as if Valjean and Javert become brothers in a way. They're the opposite side of the same coin, and I think the camaraderie we have off stage plays itself on stage, and I think that the immediacy of our friendship informs what we do on stage, and that keeps it fresh. We actually share a dressing room. We're always cutting up. And I think that if we were to only see each other as we step on stage, it would become very, very rote, and it would be mechanical. But having that connection with him off stage and then on keeps it really fresh and immediate. So, yeah, it's a pleasure working with him.
Gosh, thanks.
Yeah.
But, you know, as Chris was saying, we cut up. And somebody came up to me who had done Les Mis, and he said, you know, I've never seen a Valjean and Javert laugh so much. And I said, well, that's the nature of serious theater, that if we're doing something that's abjectly serious on stage, there has to be humor somewhere. We have to develop some kind of rapport, otherwise we're going to be very boring people. And I didn't get into this business to be boring. I got into this business because I thought it was thrilling to be able to move and affect people in an emotional and intellectual way. And if I'm not emotionally and intellectually supported backstage by my colleagues, I'm going to dread going to work. And that's what makes it so much fun for us. I mean, literally fun to go to work. And then the gratification comes is that I'm also surrounded by competent professionals that when we put it all together, we're presented a unified artistic vision to the people that are in the seats, to the point at which, while we're staging the show, Bob is giving us a direction and then running to every far corner of the stage or the seating area to make sure that each seat has a good view. That is rarely done. As ridiculous as it may sound, so many directors and producers will sit in the middle of the house and say, that looks great from here, but won't have the wherewithal to get their butt off the seat and go make sure that every seat in the house is going to be well served. And honestly, that's why Chris and I are here, that we know that whatever we do will be visible to every seat in the house, and that the work of Raphael will be worthy of inspection from the front row to the back row, or to the camera if they rent this costumes out to a film crew, because it's that detailed.
Well, there's a few times that by, 20 or 30 hours in when I just say, screw it. But most of the time I check out where we're all sitting. Let's open it up for questions. Yes? Here comes a microphone.
You get a microphone with that.
I had two. Oh, yeah. I had two questions. Where will I see the 93 button vest in the show?
You got to count them.
That's why I want to know where it is. Second was, the deal with Phoenix. What parts do you share in the costume store?
Sure. I'll let Raphael answer the best question.
It's the only one with 93 buttons.
Because there's some with 90 and 92?
It's you first see it at the very end of Act 1. It's word by Angel Ross. And you first see it during One Day More.
When Angel Ross comes in at the very end of Act 1 with a gun in his hand and he sings center stage, up center stage, it's really visible. It's a shiny, big vest with lots of buttons. What do we share with Phoenix? We share only 5 of the same actors, 6 of the same actors, because Phoenix, being a much larger city, has a much larger casting market. So our friends at the Phoenix Theater don't have the same kind of housing. Interestingly, at Arkansas Rep, we own 2 apartment buildings. And when we talk a lot about there's no theater like Arkansas Rep in a city the size of Little Rock. And one of the reasons is we have wonderful actors here in Central Arkansas. But in terms of union actors, our actors we can't provide enough employment for actors to work full-time as actors, so they have day jobs. But in Phoenix, they have a larger union casting pool. So only 6 of the actors are going to Phoenix because they don't have the housing at Phoenix Theater that we have. We'll take, the set was built to travel on semis, so the set will come out and we have 2 days, 3, to get the set out to Phoenix. All of Raphael's costumes will go to Phoenix. All the properties will go to Phoenix. I will go to Phoenix and Raphael will go to Phoenix. We will have a different stage manager, a different musical director, a different lighting designer. That's it, isn't it? That's huge. That's the terrifying thing because this cliche about theater being a collaborative art form is an essential definition of what we do. And so it's very frightening, and it's all economics because the Phoenix folks have their resident people, and so it's more expensive to bring in the outside people. And so to reinvent this wheel in the 2.5 weeks we have to reinvent this wheel with an entirely different, half of a new creative team. I've never done that before. It's going to be very, very interesting. It's like, I guess it's like being Americans and going to the space station and dealing with the Russians at the space station and you just figure it out, or because the alternative is not good, so, we'll figure it out. Yes?
I actually have 2 questions, thank you.
Here's the microphone.
I don't think I need it, but okay.
They want it for the recording.
Okay. When Les Mis was first released for regional theaters, and I know the reputation that the Rep has across the United States, was anyone with a regional theater able to have access to that and to do that, or was it based on the fact that the reputation of the rep? And could anyone, any theater get it, or was there specific criteria?
Not the first time out. The first time out, in the first wave, they invited about 10 theaters, 10 regional theaters to do it. And at first time out, Cameron McIntosh was interested in seeing what smaller budgets would do with the show. It had never been done for anything less than millions and millions of dollars. So he was interested in seeing, you know, how do you solve these problems? How do you start over? What different risks will you take with the work? Now, since that initial wave, there have been, you know, now a lot more theaters are doing it, but it is still an awesomely daunting undertaking. Nobody wants to do a bad production of Les Mis, and it's still one of the most expensive musicals to produce. And of course, keep in mind that as regional theaters go, there aren't that many theaters like Arkansas Rep that do musicals because they're so expensive and because they're in bigger markets with bigger roadhouses. You were going to say something, Raphael? Did you pick up that mic?
No, but interesting, the first production was given to the Pioneer Theater in Salt Lake City, and I can tell you why. When the touring company of Les Mis went to, in the 80s, went to Salt Lake City, you were there? And I was living there, and I remember staying in a hotel, because I was living in Park City, Utah, so I could get in line. The line went around blocks and blocks and blocks, and in one day they sold, it was a 2-week run, they sold, they sold 75% of their tickets until they closed the doors. That's how long the line was. So that's the first theater that was given the royalties to, and they actually extended it for 2 more weeks, because it made it to the New York Times, and they told Cameron McIntosh, and he cleared their schedule so they could stay for a full month in Salt Lake. That's the company we got the French scenes from to try to base our production. And we altered them enough so that we could do it with less people. And then we were one of the few back then, because I remember when Bob was just like jumping up and down, we can do Les Mis, we can do Les Mis, you know. And we're going like, oh, we're going to do it.
The inflection might have been different, but that
Yeah, he didn't sound Puerto
might have
Rican
been a
like I
question
did.
mark at the end of that same phrase.
I was actually part of the cast in Utah. You were? I was on that tour when it came to Utah for the first time. Yeah, I was the dead guy. I was like this. Unless you saw the Saturday afternoon matinee in which I was the understudy. I was the cover for Valjean for almost 2 years on the tour. For a 26-year-old recent grad student who made more money in 8 months of touring than he had in his entire existence as a busboy, waiter, and janitor. It was a great trip. But I loved it. I skied a lot while we were there. But as far as the aspect of those 10 companies that were invited to give a shot to their production of Les Mis, I was part of 3 of them. And what the rep did was on a par that was no comparison to what the others did. And in fact, it was no comparison to what the original Broadway company was because of the detail. We, as I alluded to before, the production was the Big Gray Elephant. Literally, it was a $4 million set that toured the country with 2 forklifts on which were piled all sorts of barricade paraphernalia. We used to call it the Big Gray Elephant, and it was actor-proof. You would see, it's like Phantom, you see the chandelier and the boat and the candles, and you see Les Mis with the barricades and the gray, and if somebody was a bad actor, you wouldn't notice. At the rep, it's a different game. It's all up close and personal. And so that's the level of detail that a lot of times producers have to prove, ultimately.
One of the things we're doing differently, and I'll get to your question, when we did it in '08, we spent a lot of time figuring out the mechanics of the turntable. And so Mike Nichols built a 7-inch deck off the main floor to house the mechanics of the turntable. And that deck ran from the stage that you see all the way through all the shops out into the alley between Main and Scott Street. In order to get the mechanism in place, it had to be that big. So he decked the entire back of the theater to create the mechanism for the mechanics so that the thing moved by itself. And then we went to Phoenix, and Phoenix, because of the way the building was built, they couldn't put in that mechanism. So we had to figure out a way to turn it by hand. And I was so pleased with how it came out because, you know, Les Mis is the kind of play that, you know, when the Royal Shakespeare Company does something initially, can have a real gritty life to it. It can have even Nicholas Nickleby, you know, that sense of we see how the actors create the world. And I wanted that sense of this being a very theatricalized world. And so when we created the actor-driven turntable in Phoenix, I really liked that idea. I mean, Mike Nichols liked it because he didn't have to deck from here to Maumelle, but it gives a rawness to the production that I think speaks to the nature of the play. So when you see the production at the Rep, we don't have all the mechanisms that we had in the first one. The turntable still turns, but it turns through the actors. So you'll see it's a very different process. And then there was a happy accident also. Well, I shouldn't say it. I'm not going to tell that story. It was about the Gavroche, how we ended up killing the Gavroche in you know what I mean? The little boy, you know the story. The little boy gets killed.
He's okay now.
Yeah. And we found a much more interesting, I think, a more interestingly dramatic way to tell that story in this production. We'll see what you think when you come and see it. It's different than you've seen before. Yes, ma'am, you had a question.
Just one question out of many that I'm interested in. As an audience, will we know the difference? Will we be aware of the difference in the orchestration?
I guess it just depends on how much you've listened to the original orchestrations. I don't know. I definitely, picked up on them quickly. They're definitely more of a chamber feel and less of a big symphonic feel. I mean, there's just 14 of us. I think there are some beautiful things they've done with it, some fun, creative things they've added into, like Master of the House, for instance. There's some really funny trombone fart noises and stuff like that. You know,
if you know the music really well,
yeah,
you'll hear the difference.
Right.
It's a faster tempo. There's less time between the scenes. You'll notice in our production, it's boom, 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 boom. It moves. There's no transition. Romantic transition stuff is not there. Now that I've lived with it for over a year, I like it better now, and I don't want to go back and listen to the other, which seems a little overproduced and overindulged. This one just seems a little more to the point. And now that I'm hearing what, you know, it's much more complicated music. And I think it's more interesting. But, you know, you hear a song a certain way and then somebody re-records it and you go, oh, I like it the way it was done before. But that's the nature of theater. You know, we're not interested in, it's not a museum. We're not interested in recreating our past. We're interested in telling fresh stories. And so we'll see what you think.
Yeah, and for instance, like with, there were a lot of things that I really loved that they did, but I felt like a part of them were just trying to cut as many minutes as they could out of it. And so they did that, like Bob said, with a lot of the transitions and a lot of the tempos. For instance, when Fantine starts I Dreamed a Dream, Bob and I mutually agreed that it was too fast and it was kind of jerky, and it just took the emotion out of this little recitative that she has before she goes into the song we all love, you know? And so the beauty of being on a creative team is we have the freedom to adjust that, and so I took out the jerkiness, and we're just playing it in a legato format and just a recitative style, where the actress who plays Fantine has total freedom to interpret it the way that she wants. You know?
When you're handed a script and a tradition, you can either serve it up the way it's always been served, or you can trust the artistry of the chef. And that's really what it comes down to, creativity, that we're given the same amount of raw materials. It's the same chicken, it's the same vegetables, but you either trust the chef to make something special for his audience that you particularly in Little Rock will appreciate and understand and want, as opposed to what's served up in New York. We don't have the traditional 1980s version, just as we don't have shoulder pads and big hair. It's a different style, it's a different appreciation.
In defense of the orchestration changing, you were dealing with a show that literally used a turntable from beginning to end. They used it for everything, and the grand music that was playing was for huge set pieces coming in, and it doesn't serve the piece when it plays much more intimate spaces. It makes it more accessible for other theaters to do it with this new orchestration, because you had wasted amount of orchestration for set changes that didn't require that much music. Most places don't have big hydraulic barricade walls coming in that needs like measures and measures of grand music. So this orchestration serves smaller, more intimate spaces better, and it's more immediate. So,
And I just want to say, because one of the things when we were doing this, I mean, we will not tell Bob this, but it was a lot of the staff that had worked on it. It was such a special show 5 years ago to us, and it was our favorite show. And it was like, we're doing it again, and what if we don't like it? It is so much, it's so much better. It's the talent, it's raw, the voices are amazing. The set is different. The costumes are pretty damn good. There's a whole lot more of them. The Thénardiers, for example, I mean, I loved our past Thénardiers. They are funny and they are gross. And Bob and I, last night during notes, he was arguing with me because he didn't like one aspect of one of the costumes. He said, but he looks gross, he looks sick. And I said, that's what I was trying. And then he
Yeah,
goes,
you got there, that's for sure.
So, but it's really, and with the intimacy of our space, it's just, I mean, we were getting like people standing at the end of songs yesterday. I mean,
Yeah, we had a standing ovation at intermission, which doesn't happen. Then I was pretty impressed by that, and I realized, it's a 90-minute first act, and they probably just had to go to the bathroom. But it looked pretty good from an audience perspective to say, wow, they're standing up, and it's just halfway through. And I know we need to wrap this up because it's 1 o'clock, and we could go on forever talking about Les Mis. And you guys are great to come and talk to us here today. And thank you, and thank the Clinton School, Nikolai. Thank you so much. Come see Les Mis. Thank you.